Behind the golden gates of Ravencrest Palace, where centuries of royal blood had walked these marble halls, a secret so explosive was about to tear apart the most powerful monarchy in Europe. What started as whispered rumors in the servants' quarters would soon become the scandal that threatened to destroy not just reputations, but the very foundation of the crown itself. When Lady Isabel's desperate screams echoed through the East Wing that fateful autumn evening, and the Queen's guard stood firm at the forbidden doors of the Crown Princess's private chambers, no one could have predicted that this single moment would unravel a web of deceit spanning 3 generations. The truth behind those locked doors would shake the kingdom to its core, expose betrayals that ran deeper than anyone imagined, and force a choice between duty and justice that would change the royal family forever. Some secrets are worth killing for. Others are worth dying to expose. This is the story of how one woman's courage to speak truth to power brought down the most guarded secret in royal history. Lady Isabel Victoria Thornfield had served the royal family for 12 years, but she had never seen anything like the scene unfolding before her eyes in the Crown Princess's private wing. The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Ravencrest Palace, creating an ominous rhythm that seemed to match her racing heartbeat as she clutched the damning photographs in her trembling hands. The photographs had arrived that morning in an unmarked envelope, slipped under her door while she prepared for her duties as the Queen Consort's personal secretary. Each image told a story that could destroy everything she had dedicated her life to protecting. The Crown Princess Alexandra, beloved by millions and heir to the throne, was captured in compromising positions with someone who definitely was not her husband, Prince Marcus. Isabel's mind raced as she studied the images again. The man in the photographs was tall, dark-haired, and unmistakably handsome. She recognized him immediately as Captain James Rothschild, head of the palace security detail, and a man whose loyalty to the crown was supposed to be absolute. The intimate nature of the photographs left no room for innocent interpretation. They showed stolen kisses in hidden alcoves, passionate embraces in the royal gardens, and, most damning of all, the 2 figures entering a private suite together during the Queen's state dinner just 3 weeks prior. The weight of what she held could topple governments. The Kingdom of Aldermere had strict laws about royal succession, and any scandal involving the Crown Princess could trigger a constitutional crisis that would make international headlines. More importantly, Isabel knew that Queen Consort Beatrice, Alexandra's stepmother, had been searching for exactly this kind of ammunition for years. Beatrice had never hidden her preference for her own son, Prince William, to inherit the throne instead of Alexandra. The marriage between King Edward and Beatrice had been political from the start, a union designed to strengthen ties with the neighboring kingdom of Westmarch. But Beatrice had brought ambition and cunning that rivaled any medieval queen, and she had spent the last 15 years systematically undermining Alexandra's position while elevating her own son's profile. Isabel remembered the countless private meetings she had arranged, the carefully orchestrated media appearances, and the subtle campaign to paint Alexandra as irresponsible and unfit for the crown. But these photographs would be the final blow that Beatrice needed to achieve her ultimate goal. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside snapped Isabel back to the present. She quickly tucked the photographs in her jacket pocket and tried to compose herself, but her hands continued to shake as she smoothed her skirt and checked her reflection in the ornate mirror that hung beside the princess's door. Lady Thornfield, the voice belonged to Sarah Mitchell, one of the junior staff members who worked in the princess's wing. The young woman's face was pale, and her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. The Queen Consort requests your immediate presence in her private study. She says it's urgent. Isabel's heart sank. Beatrice already knew. Somehow, the Queen Consort had discovered the photographs, or worse, she was the one who had arranged for them to be taken and delivered. The timing was too perfect, too convenient for it to be anything else. Did she say what this concerns? Isabel asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah shook her head, but her nervous expression told a different story. She just said to tell you that it involves family matters of the highest importance, and that you should bring any relevant documents or materials that might be in your possession. The message was clear. Beatrice knew about the photographs, and she expected Isabel to deliver them like a loyal servant. The queen consort had always been skilled at reading people, at knowing exactly which pressure points to apply to get what she wanted. She had undoubtedly calculated that Isabel's loyalty to the crown and her fear of losing her position would override any personal feelings she might have about destroying Alexandra's life. As Isabel made her way through the palace corridors toward Beatrice's private study, she passed portraits of generations of monarchs who had ruled Aldermere with dignity and honor. The weight of history pressed down on her shoulders as she considered the choice she was about to make. These walls had witnessed countless political intrigue, but this felt different, more personal, and devastating than anything she had experienced. The queen consort private study was located in the west wing of the palace, a suite of rooms that had been completely redecorated when Beatrice married King Edward. Where the rest of the palace maintained its classical elegance, Beatrice's rooms were modern and minimalist, filled with stark furniture and contemporary art that seemed designed to make visitors feel uncomfortable and off-balance. Beatrice herself was seated behind an imposing desk made of black marble, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon, and her ice-blue eyes fixed on the door as Isabel entered. At 52, the queen consort maintained the same regal bearing that had made her a successful ambassador before her marriage, but there was something predatory in her gaze that had grown more pronounced over the years. "Lady Thornfield," Beatrice said, her voice carrying the slight accent of her homeland. "Please take a seat. We have important matters to discuss." Isabel settled into the uncomfortable modern chair across from the desk, keeping her hands carefully folded in her lap to hide their trembling. The photographs seemed to burn against her chest where they rested in her inner pocket. "I trust you received the package that was delivered to your quarters this morning?" Beatrice asked, getting straight to the point as she always did. "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty," Isabel replied, though the lie felt heavy on her tongue. Beatrice's smile was sharp and cold. "Please, Lady Thornfield, we have worked together for far too long for such games. The photographs of Crown Princess Alexandra and Captain Rothschild are quite compelling, don't you think?" The confirmation hit Isabel like a physical blow. Beatrice had not only arranged for the photographs to be taken, but she had orchestrated their delivery with the precision of a military operation. The queen consort had been planning this moment for months, possibly years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike at her stepdaughter. "These are very serious allegations," Isabel said carefully. "Surely such matters should be brought to His Majesty's attention immediately." "Oh, they will be," Beatrice assured her. "But first, I want to ensure that we have all the facts. You see, these photographs are just the beginning. I have reason to believe that Princess Alexandra's indiscretions go much deeper than a simple affair." Beatrice reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a thick manila folder. She placed it on the desk between them and opened it to reveal what appeared to be financial records, bank statements, and official correspondence. Isabel caught glimpses of large monetary transfers and what looked like communications with foreign governments. "What am I looking at?" Isabel asked, though a growing sense of dread told her she didn't want to know the answer. "Evidence that suggests the crown princess has been selling state secrets to foreign interests," Beatrice said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "The affair with Captain Rothschild appears to have been her method of accessing classified information through his security clearances." The accusation was so shocking, so completely beyond anything Isabel had imagined, that she felt physically ill. If what Beatrice was suggesting was true, then Alexandra wasn't just guilty of adultery, she was guilty of treason. The penalty for such crimes, even for a member of the royal family, could be severe enough to strip her of all titles and rights to succession. "This is impossible," Isabel whispered. "Princess Alexandra would never betray her country. She loves Aldermere more than anything." "Love can make people do terrible things," Beatrice replied. "And sometimes people are not who we think they are." Captain Rothschild has family connections to several foreign intelligence services. It would not be difficult for him to influence someone as naive and trusting as Alexandra. Isabel stared at the documents spread across the desk, her mind struggling to process the implications. If Beatrice was right, if Alexandra had truly been compromised, then everything Isabel thought she knew about the princess was wrong. But if Beatrice was lying, if this was an elaborate setup designed to eliminate Alexandra from the line of succession, then Isabel was being asked to participate in the destruction of an innocent woman. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "I want you to go to Princess Alexandra's private wing and confront her with this evidence," Beatrice said. "I want you to give her the opportunity to confess and to cooperate with the investigation that will inevitably follow. If she is innocent, as you believe, then she should have no problem explaining these financial records and her relationship with Captain Rothschild." The request seemed reasonable on the surface, but Isabel detected the trap hidden within it. Beatrice was asking her to do the dirty work, to be the one who delivered the accusations and destroyed Alexandra's life. If the princess broke down and confessed under pressure, Beatrice would have the admission she needed. If Alexandra denied everything, Beatrice could claim that she had tried to handle the matter discreetly before involving the king. And if she refuses to cooperate, Isabel asked, then we will have no choice but to present this evidence directly to His Majesty and let him decide how to proceed, Beatrice replied. But I hope for everyone's sake that it doesn't come to that. A public scandal would be devastating for the monarchy. Isabel understood the underlying threat. Beatrice was offering Alexandra one last chance to step aside quietly, to abdicate her rights to the throne in exchange for avoiding a very public trial for treason. It was an elegant solution from Beatrice's perspective, one that would eliminate her rival while appearing to show mercy and discretion. "I'll need some time to review all of this evidence," Isabel said, gesturing to the documents on the desk. "Of course," Beatrice agreed, closing the folder and handing it to her. "Take all the time you need. But remember, Lady Thornfield, every moment we delay gives Alexandra another opportunity to destroy evidence or flee the country. The longer we wait, the more difficult this becomes for everyone involved." As Isabel left the Queen Consort study with the folder tucked under her arm and the photographs burning in her pocket, she felt as though she was carrying the weight of the kingdom itself. The corridors of the palace seemed longer and more oppressive than ever before, and the portraits of past monarchs appeared to watch her with accusing eyes. She knew that whatever decision she made in the next few hours would change the course of history for Aldermere. The question was whether she would be remembered as the woman who saved the kingdom from a traitor, or as the one who helped destroy an innocent princess for the ambitions of a power-hungry stepmother. The rain continued to fall against the palace windows as Isabel made her way toward the East Wing, where Princess Alexandra's private chambers waited behind their guarded doors. With each step, the weight of her decision grew heavier, and the sound of her footsteps echoed through the empty hallways like the tolling of a funeral bell. The princess's private wing stood before Isabel like a fortress, its heavy oak doors flanked by two imposing guards in the ceremonial red and gold uniforms of the Royal Guard. Captain Rothschild was nowhere to be seen, which struck Isabel as either incredibly convenient or deeply suspicious, depending on how much truth lay in Beatrice's accusations. Guard Lieutenant Harrison, a man Isabel had known for years, straightened as she approached. His weathered face showed confusion as he noticed the folder under her arm and the obvious distress in her expression. "Lady Thornfield," he said with a respectful nod. "The princess isn't receiving visitors today. She's requested complete privacy." "This is a matter of urgent state business," Isabel replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the chaos in her mind. "I need to speak with Her Royal Highness immediately." Lieutenant Harrison exchanged glances with his companion, Guard Corporal Williams, a younger man whose nervousness was evident in the way he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. Both guards knew Isabel well enough to understand that she would never make such a request lightly, but Their duty to protect the princess's privacy was absolute. "I'm sorry, Lady Thornfield, but our orders are very specific," Harrison said. "No one is to disturb the princess today, regardless of the circumstances." These orders came directly from Captain Rothschild this morning. The mention of Rothschild's name sent a chill down Isabel's spine. If the captain had given orders to isolate Alexandra today, it could mean that he knew about the photographs and was trying to control the situation. Or it could mean that Beatrice had already spoken to him, and this was part of a larger plan to trap the princess with no witnesses and no way to defend herself. "Where is Captain Rothschild now?" Isabel asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "He left the palace about an hour ago." Corporal Williams answered before Harrison could stop him. Said he had urgent business in the city and wouldn't be back until late this evening. Harrison shot his colleague a warning look, clearly disapproving of sharing operational details. But the damage was done, and Isabel felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Rothschild's convenient absence meant that whatever happened in the next few hours, the man at the center of the allegations would not be available to provide his side of the story. "I understand your position," Isabel said, "but I have direct orders from Queen Consort Beatrice to deliver these documents to Princess Alexandra immediately. Surely you're not suggesting that the Queen Consort's authority should be ignored." The guards exchanged another look, this one filled with the kind of dread that comes from being caught between conflicting orders from the royal family. In the complex hierarchy of the palace, Queen Consort Beatrice technically had the authority to override Captain Rothschild's instructions, but doing so could have serious consequences for the guards' careers. "Perhaps we could send word to the princess that you're here," Harrison suggested. "If she agrees to see you, then we can allow entry." Isabel knew that this was the best compromise she was likely to get, but she also knew that it gave Alexandra time to prepare for whatever was coming. If the princess was truly innocent, that preparation time might help her defend herself. If she was guilty, it might give her opportunity to destroy evidence. "Very well," Isabel agreed. "But please emphasize the urgency of the matter." Corporal Williams disappeared through a side entrance that led to the servants' passages within the princess's wing. These corridors allowed staff to move through the royal quarters without disturbing the principal occupants, and they were often the quickest way to deliver messages. While they waited, Isabel found herself studying Lieutenant Harrison's face, searching for any sign that he might know more about the situation than he was revealing. The lieutenant had been with the Royal Guard for over 20 years, and his loyalty to the crown was unquestioned. But loyalty could be a complicated thing when it involved choosing between different members of the royal family. "Has Princess Alexandra seemed different lately?" Isabel asked carefully, distressed or worried about anything. Harrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that suggested her question had hit close to home. "It's not my place to comment on the princess's state of mind," he said formally. "But if I may speak freely, Lady Thornfield, she has seemed more withdrawn in recent weeks. More time spent in private, fewer public engagements. Some of the staff have been concerned." This information aligned perfectly with what Isabel would expect if Alexandra was either carrying on a secret affair or dealing with the stress of being blackmailed by foreign agents. The ambiguity was maddening, and it made Isabel realize how skillfully Beatrice had constructed her case. Every piece of evidence could be interpreted in multiple ways, and every inconsistency could be explained by either guilt or innocence. Corporal Williams returned after what felt like an eternity, his face grave as he approached his superior officer. The young man whispered something in Harrison's ear that made the lieutenant's expression darken considerably. "What is it?" Isabel demanded, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "The princess requests that you leave the documents with us," Harrison said slowly. "She says she will review them when she is feeling better and respond in due course." "Feeling better?" Isabel repeated. "Is the princess ill?" "She appears to be indisposed," Williams answered. "Her maid says she's been in her chambers all day, refusing meals and visitors. She seemed quite upset when I delivered your message." The situation was spiraling beyond Isabel's control. If Alexandra was already aware of the accusations against her, it could mean that someone else had already delivered similar evidence, or that the stress of her situation had finally overwhelmed her. Either way, Isabel couldn't complete her mission by simply leaving the documents with the guards. "I need to speak with Princess Alexandra directly," Isabel insisted. "These matters cannot wait for written correspondence." "I'm afraid that's impossible," Harrison said firmly. "My orders are absolute, and the princess has made her wishes clear." Isabel felt frustration building in her chest. She was trapped between Beatrice's expectations and Alexandra's refusal to see her. If she returned to the queen consort empty-handed, Beatrice would undoubtedly escalate the situation, possibly going directly to King Edward with the evidence. But if she forced her way into Alexandra's chambers, she would be violating both royal protocol and the direct orders of the royal guard. "Then, I demand to speak with Captain Rothschild," she said, grasping at the only remaining option. "Captain Rothschild is unavailable," Harrison reminded her. "And even if he were here, I don't believe he would override the princess's explicit wishes for privacy." The standoff was complete. Isabel stood before the guarded doors, holding evidence that could destroy the future queen, while Alexandra remained hidden behind walls of protocol and royal privilege. The symmetry of the situation was almost poetic, but it solved none of her immediate problems. As she stood there, weighing her options, Isabel became aware of voices coming from within the princess's chambers. They were muffled by the heavy doors and thick walls, but she could make out at least two distinct speakers, one of whom was clearly female and agitated. "Do you hear that?" she asked the guards. Both men tilted their heads to listen, and their expressions grew troubled as they recognized what Isabel had noticed. There were definitely multiple voices coming from inside the princess's supposedly private retreat. Princess Alexandra was supposed to be alone, Corporal Williams said to his superior. Those were Captain Rothschild's specific instructions. Harrison's jaw tightened as he considered the implications. If someone had gained unauthorized access to the princess's chambers, it was a serious security breach that could cost him his position. But if he abandoned his post to investigate, he would be violating direct orders from his commanding officer. The voices from within grew louder, and suddenly there was the distinct sound of something heavy falling to the floor, followed by what sounded unmistakably like a woman's cry of distress. All three people standing outside the door froze as they recognized the sound. "That's the princess," Williams whispered, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon at his side. Harrison was faced with an impossible choice. His orders were to maintain the princess's privacy and allow no visitors, but those same orders became meaningless if the princess was in danger. The lieutenant had served the royal family long enough to know that protocol meant nothing compared to the safety of the crown's heir. "Stand aside," he ordered Williams, drawing his own weapon as he approached the door. But before he could act, the voices from within suddenly stopped, and the chamber fell silent. The three people outside the door stood frozen, straining to hear any sound that might indicate what was happening behind the heavy oak barrier. Then, clear as a bell, came the sound of Princess Alexandra's voice, raised in what could only be described as a scream of rage and desperation. The words were indistinguishable, but the emotion was unmistakable, and it cut through the afternoon air like a knife. Lieutenant Harrison didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and pounded on the door with his fist, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years of service to the crown. "Your Royal Highness, this is Lieutenant Harrison of the Royal Guard. Please respond immediately to confirm your safety." The silence that followed was even more ominous than the screaming had been. Isabel felt her heart racing as she imagined all the terrible scenarios that could explain what they had heard. If Alexandra was being coerced or threatened, every second they waited outside the door could be putting her in greater danger. "Your Royal Highness," Harrison called again. "If you do not respond within 10 seconds, we will be forced to enter your chambers to ensure your safety." Still nothing. The lieutenant looked at Isabel and Williams, his face reflecting the same dread they all felt. The Princess of Aldermere, heir to one of Europe's oldest thrones, was trapped behind doors that her own guards were afraid to open. Harrison began counting down from 10, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. When he reached 0, he nodded to Williams, who produced a master key from his belt. The sound of the lock turning seemed to echo through the entire wing of the palace. As the door swung open, Isabel caught her first glimpse of Princess Alexandra's private sitting room, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Furniture was overturned, papers were scattered across the floor, and there was clear evidence of a struggle. But the most shocking sight was Princess Alexandra herself, standing in the center of the room with tears streaming down her face and a letter clutched in her trembling hands. She was not alone. A man in a dark suit stood near the window, his back turned toward the door, and Isabel could see that he was speaking quietly into a mobile phone. He turned as the guards entered, and Isabel recognized him immediately as one of Queen Consort Beatrice's private security detail. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison demanded, his weapon still drawn as he assessed the scene. Princess Alexandra looked up at the sound of his voice, and Isabel saw something in her eyes that she had never seen before, a mixture of betrayal, fear, and desperate determination that transformed the usually composed royal into someone barely recognizable. "They want me to sign this," Alexandra said, her voice hoarse from crying. "They want me to abdicate my rights to the throne and admit to crimes I never committed." The letter in her hands was clearly an official document, complete with royal seals and legal language. Isabel didn't need to read it to understand what had happened. Beatrice had not been content to wait for a confrontation through proper channels. She had sent her own people to force a confession and abdication from Alexandra while Rothschild was conveniently absent, and the guards were under orders not to interfere. "This is completely improper," Harrison said, his voice rising with anger. "No one has the authority to coerce a member of the royal family in this manner." The man by the window finished his phone call and turned to face them with the calm confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "I am Agent Morrison from Queen Consort Beatrice's security detail," he said formally. "I am operating under direct orders from Her Majesty to resolve a matter of national security. Princess Alexandra has been presented with evidence of treasonous activities and given the opportunity to cooperate voluntarily." "I have committed no treason," Alexandra said, her voice growing stronger as anger replaced fear. "The evidence they claim to have is fabricated, and I will not be forced to confess to crimes that exist only in my stepmother's imagination." Isabel felt the weight of the folder still tucked under her arm and realized that she held the key to resolving this standoff. The documents Beatrice had given her could either prove Alexandra's guilt or expose the elaborate setup that was being used to destroy her. But examining them properly would require time and expertise that none of them possessed at the moment. "Agent Morrison," she said, stepping forward with all the authority her position granted her, "I am Lady Thornfield, personal secretary to Queen Consort Beatrice. I am here under Her Majesty's direct orders to review this evidence with Princess Alexandra and ensure that all proper procedures are followed." Morrison's expression flickered with uncertainty as he recognized the complexity of the situation. He had expected to deal with an isolated and defenseless princess, not a member of the Queen Consort's own staff who could potentially witness and report on everything that transpired. "The Queen Consort instructed me to handle this matter discreetly," he said carefully, "and discretion includes ensuring that all evidence is properly examined and all parties have an opportunity to respond," Isabel replied. "I suggest we adjourn to a more formal setting where this matter can be resolved according to proper protocol." Princess Alexandra looked at Isabel with a mixture of hope and suspicion. She had no way of knowing whether this unexpected ally was genuine or simply another part of Beatrice's elaborate scheme. But the presence of the royal guards and Isabel's insistence on proper procedures had at least stopped the immediate pressure for her to sign the abdication document. "I will not sign anything until I have had an opportunity to consult with my own legal counsel and review all alleged evidence in detail," Alexandra declared, using the formal tone that she had learned to employ in official situations. Agent Morrison looked uncomfortable as he realized that his mission was failing. He spoke quietly into his phone again, presumably updating Beatrice on the unexpected complications. While he was distracted, Isabel moved closer to Princess Alexandra and lowered her voice. "Your Royal Highness, there are matters we need to discuss in private," she whispered. "Things that affect not just your future, but the future of the entire kingdom." Alexandra studied Isabel's face, searching for any hint of deception or manipulation. What she found instead was genuine concern and something that looked very much like loyalty to the crown rather than to any individual member of the royal family. "Very well," Alexandra said aloud, so that everyone in the room could hear. "I agree to review whatever evidence exists, but only in the presence of proper witnesses and with full opportunity for response and defense." Agent Morrison finished his phone call and approached them with obvious reluctance. "Queen Consort Beatrice has agreed to a formal review of the evidence," he announced. "However, she requires that Princess Alexandra remain in her quarters under guard until the matter is resolved." "That is completely unacceptable," Harrison interjected. "Princess Alexandra is not under arrest, and you have no authority to restrict her movements." The standoff was reaching a critical point. Beatrice had clearly underestimated the complications that would arise from trying to force a quick resolution, and now she was trapped in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond her control. If she backed down, she would lose her opportunity to eliminate Alexandra from the succession. If she escalated further, she risked exposing her own role in what was beginning to look like a palace coup. Isabel realized that the next few minutes would determine not just Alexandra's fate, but the future of the monarchy itself. The evidence in the folder under her arm had the power to save or condemn the princess, but first she needed to understand exactly what kind of web Beatrice had woven around her stepdaughter. The rain continued to beat against the windows as 5 people stood in the ransacked room, each calculating their next move in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the crown of Aldermere. The tension in Princess Alexandra's sitting room had reached a breaking point when the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Isabel recognized the distinctive rhythm immediately, the measured, authoritative gait of King Edward himself. Her heart sank as she realized that Beatrice had escalated the situation beyond any hope of quiet resolution. "His Majesty approaches," Lieutenant Harrison announced unnecessarily, as everyone in the room had already recognized the sound. The lieutenant quickly holstered his weapon and stood at attention, while Corporal Williams moved to open the door. King Edward entered the room with the bearing of a man who had ruled for 23 years, but Isabel could see the strain of recent months etched in the lines around his eyes. Behind him walked Queen Consort Beatrice, her expression a perfect mask of concerned dignity, and Prince William, her son, whose presence added another layer of complexity to the already volatile situation. The king's gaze swept across the overturned furniture and scattered papers before settling on his daughter. Alexandra had straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture of defiance that reminded everyone present why she had been beloved by the people of Aldermere since childhood. "Father," Alexandra said, her voice steady despite the tears that still glistened on her cheeks. "Alexandra," the king replied, his tone carefully neutral, "I have been informed that there are serious matters that require immediate attention." Beatrice stepped forward, her performance of maternal concern so perfectly executed that anyone who didn't know better would have believed she was genuinely worried about her stepdaughter's welfare. "Edward, I'm so sorry that it has come to this," she said, her voice heavy with manufactured regret. "I had hoped that we could handle this discreetly, but Alexandra has refused to cooperate with what is clearly a matter of national security." Prince William remained silent, but Isabel noticed that he kept glancing between his mother and his half-sister with an expression that seemed more troubled than triumphant. At 26, William was popular with the public and had always maintained a cordial relationship with Alexandra, despite the obvious rivalry between their mothers. His presence here suggested that Beatrice was confident of victory and ready to begin positioning her own son for the succession. What exactly are these allegations? King Edward asked, directing his question to Beatrice, but keeping his eyes on Alexandra. Treason, Your Majesty, Agent Morrison answered before Beatrice could respond. We have evidence that Princess Alexandra has been providing classified state information to foreign agents in exchange for personal compensation. The word treason seemed to echo in the room like a physical blow. Even in the modern era, it remained one of the most serious crimes that could be leveled against a member of the royal family. If proven, it would not only strip Alexandra of her right to succession, but could result in imprisonment or exile. That is absolutely false, Alexandra declared, her voice ringing with conviction. I have never betrayed my country or my crown. These accusations are part of a deliberate campaign to destroy my reputation and remove me from the line of succession. King Edward's expression remained impassive, but Isabel could see the pain in his eyes as he looked at his daughter. The king had always been devoted to Alexandra, and the idea that she could be guilty of such charges was clearly devastating to him. What evidence supports these accusations? He asked. Beatrice nodded to Agent Morrison, who produced a briefcase and began laying out documents on one of the few remaining upright tables. The papers appeared to be photocopies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and what looked like encrypted communications. These financial records show payments of substantial sums to accounts controlled by Princess Alexandra, Morrison explained. The payments correspond directly with dates when classified information was accessed through the palace security systems using Captain Rothschild credentials. Isabel felt her stomach drop as she recognized the sophistication of the frame being constructed around Alexandra. The evidence was detailed and convincing, the kind of documentation that could fool even experienced investigators if they didn't look too closely at the source. Where's Captain Rothschild? King Edward asked. Surely he should be present to address these accusations. Captain Rothschild left the palace this morning on what he described as urgent personal business, Beatrice replied smoothly. We have been unable to reach him despite multiple attempts. The convenient disappearance of the man at the center of the allegations was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Isabel began to understand just how carefully Beatrice had orchestrated this entire scenario. Rothschild's absence meant that he couldn't defend himself or Alexandra, and it also suggested guilt by association. I demand a full investigation, Alexandra said. These documents could have been fabricated by anyone with access to basic financial software. And Captain Rothschild's absence proves nothing except that someone wanted him out of the way. Of course, there will be a full investigation, the king assured her. But these are serious allegations that cannot be ignored. Until we can determine the truth, certain precautions may be necessary. Isabel realized that this was her moment to act. The folder tucked under her arm contained either the proof of Alexandra's guilt or the evidence needed to expose Beatrice's conspiracy. But revealing its contents would force her to choose sides in a conflict that would reshape the monarchy forever. Your Majesty, she said, stepping forward with as much confidence as she could muster. I have additional evidence that may be relevant to this investigation. Every eye in the room turned toward her, and Isabel felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Beatrice's expression flickered with surprise and concern, clearly not having expected her loyal secretary to complicate the carefully planned scene. What kind of evidence? The king asked. Isabel opened the folder and withdrew the first set of documents, her hands remarkably steady despite the enormity of what she was about to reveal. I have been conducting a preliminary investigation at the request of Queen Consort Beatrice, she began, choosing her words carefully. During the course of this investigation, I discovered several inconsistencies in the evidence that has been presented. Beatrice's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure as Isabel spread the papers across the table beside Morrison's documents. The financial records that had seemed so damning when viewed in isolation began to tell a different story when examined alongside the additional information that Isabel had uncovered. These bank statements, Isabel continued, pointing to the documents Morrison had presented, show payments to accounts allegedly controlled by Princess Alexandra. However, when we trace the actual ownership of these accounts, we find that they were opened using forged identification documents. She produced copies of the bank records she had obtained through her own investigation, records that showed the accounts had been opened with falsified royal credentials that could only have been created by someone with high-level access to palace security systems. Furthermore, Isabel continued, the timing of these transactions corresponds not with Princess Alexandra's access to classified information, but with Queen Consort Beatrice's private meetings with foreign dignitaries and trade representatives. The accusation hung in the air like an explosive device waiting to detonate. Isabel had just suggested that Beatrice herself might be the real traitor, using her position and access to sell state secrets while framing her stepdaughter for the crime. Beatrice's mask of composed concern finally cracked, revealing the rage and desperation beneath. "This is preposterous," she snapped. "Lady Thornfield has clearly been compromised by her loyalty to Alexandra. These documents are obvious fabrications designed to deflect attention from the real crime." "Then, you won't mind if we examine them more closely," King Edward said, his voice carrying a new edge that suggested he was beginning to see the situation in a different light. Prince William had remained silent throughout the confrontation, but now he stepped forward with an expression of growing comprehension and horror. "Mother," he said quietly, "please tell me that you didn't actually do this." The question revealed more than any amount of evidence could have. William's immediate understanding of what his mother was capable of suggested that this was not the first time he had witnessed her willingness to destroy others for personal gain. "William, you don't understand the pressures I face," Beatrice began, but her son cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I understand perfectly," he said. "You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Everything has been leading up to this moment when you could eliminate Alexandra and clear the path for me to inherit the throne." The confession was devastating in its simplicity. William had just confirmed what everyone in the room had begun to suspect, that Beatrice had orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to frame Alexandra for treason as part of a long-term plan to alter the line of succession. "You don't know what you're saying," Beatrice protested, but the desperation in her voice only served to confirm her son's accusations. King Edward had been watching this exchange with growing horror, and now he stepped toward his wife with an expression of cold fury that Isabel had never seen before. "How long?" he asked simply. "How long have you been planning to destroy my daughter?" Beatrice seemed to realize that her carefully constructed plan was collapsing around her, and the mask of civilized concern finally fell away completely, revealing the ambitious and ruthless woman beneath. "Since the day I married you," she said with bitter honesty. "Did you really think I would allow your bastard daughter to inherit a throne that should belong to my son?" The crude reference to Alexandra's legitimacy was a step too far, even for a woman who had just been exposed as a traitor. King Edward's face flushed with rage as he struggled to control his temper in front of witnesses. "Alexandra is my heir," he said with quiet intensity. "She was born in wedlock to my first wife, and her right to inherit is absolute and unquestionable." "Your first wife was weak," Beatrice shot back, "and Alexandra is just like her, soft, naive, and completely unsuited for the realities of modern statecraft. This kingdom needs a strong ruler, someone who understands that power requires sacrifice." The argument had moved beyond questions of evidence and guilt to the fundamental question of what kind of monarchy Aldermere should have. Beatrice was revealing her vision of a ruthless, pragmatic crown that would prioritize power over principle, while defending her actions as necessary for the kingdom's survival. "The only sacrifice that has been made here is the truth," Alexandra said, finding her voice again as the focus shifted away from her alleged crimes. "You were willing to brand me a traitor and destroy my life for the sake of your ambition." Isabel watched as the various players in this drama began to choose their positions for what was clearly going to be a decisive confrontation. King Edward stood with his daughter, his loyalty never having wavered despite the seemingly damning evidence. Prince William had rejected his mother's conspiracy, choosing honor over the crown that had been offered to him through treachery. Agent Morrison looked increasingly uncomfortable as he realized he had been part of a criminal conspiracy rather than a legitimate security operation. Lieutenant Harrison and Corporal Williams remained at attention, but Isabel could see their relief as it became clear that they had been right to protect the princess from unauthorized access to her chambers. The royal guard's loyalty was to the crown, not to any individual member of the royal family, but they clearly felt vindicated in their refusal to abandon their posts. "The question now," King Edward said, his voice heavy with the weight of royal authority, "is what happens next. We have a confirmed conspiracy against the crown, evidence of forged documents and false accusations, and the attempted coercion of the heir to the throne." Beatrice seemed to realize that her situation had become hopeless, but she was not ready to surrender without one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. "You have no proof of anything," she said defiantly. "Lady Thornfield's so-called evidence could just as easily be fabricated as the documents she claims to have exposed. It's her word against mine, and I am Queen Consort of Aldermere." But even as she spoke, Isabel was reaching into her jacket pocket to withdraw the photographs that had started this entire chain of events. The images of Alexandra and Captain Rothschild were still damning, but in the context of everything that had been revealed, they took on a completely different significance. "Actually, Your Majesty," Isabel said, addressing Beatrice with deliberate formality, "we do have proof. These photographs were delivered to me this morning with instructions to use them against Princess Alexandra." She laid the images on the table, and everyone leaned forward to examine them. The pictures clearly showed Alexandra and Rothschild in intimate moments, but now everyone understood that they were not evidence of an affair that had led to treason, but rather ammunition that had been carefully prepared for use in a conspiracy. These photographs were taken by agents working for Queen Consort Beatrice, Isabel continued. They were intended to be used as blackmail material to force Princess Alexandra to cooperate with the false accusations of treason. The revelation completed the picture of Beatrice's conspiracy. She had not only fabricated evidence of financial crimes, but had also arranged for compromising photographs to be taken as additional leverage against Alexandra. The depth of her betrayal was staggering, even for those who had suspected her of ambitious scheming. King Edward picked up one of the photographs and studied it with the careful attention of a man trying to understand how his family had been torn apart by deception and manipulation. "Captain Rothschild will need to answer for his role in this conspiracy," he said finally. "But first, we need to determine exactly how far this plot extended and who else was involved." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the corridor outside, and Captain James Rothschild burst through the door with his uniform disheveled and his face flushed with exertion. "Your Majesty," he said breathlessly, "I came as soon as I received word that there was a crisis involving Princess Alexandra." His dramatic entrance would have been perfectly timed to support Beatrice's narrative, if that narrative hadn't already been completely dismantled. Instead, his arrival only served to highlight the artificial nature of the entire conspiracy, as if he were an actor arriving late for his cue in a play that had already reached its climax. Captain Rothschild's entrance into the charged atmosphere of Princess Alexandra's sitting room was met with a silence that spoke volumes. His eyes quickly took in the scene before him, the scattered documents, the grim faces of the royal family, and, most tellingly, the photographs of himself and Alexandra spread across the table for all to see. "I can explain everything," he said, his voice carrying the desperation of a man who realized he had walked into a trap of his own making. "I'm sure you can," King Edward replied coldly. "The question is whether your explanation will be truthful or simply another layer of the deception that has been woven around my family." Rothschild's gaze flickered between Princess Alexandra and Queen Consort Beatrice, clearly trying to assess which version of events had already been established. His confusion was evident as he struggled to understand how a plan that had seemed foolproof just hours earlier had apparently collapsed so completely. "James," Alexandra said quietly, using his first name for the first time in front of others. Tell them the truth about us. Tell them what really happened. The plea in her voice revealed something that all the photographs and accusations had failed to capture. Genuine emotion between two people who had found themselves caught in circumstances beyond their control. Rothschild straightened his shoulders and looked directly at King Edward, the weight of years of loyal service giving him the courage to speak honestly. Your Majesty, I have served this crown faithfully for 15 years, he began. My relationship with Princess Alexandra began as a professional one, but over time it grew into something more personal. We fell in love, despite knowing that such a relationship was complicated by our respective positions. The admission hung in the air, confirming what the photographs had suggested, but placing it in a context that was far more honorable than the conspiracy Beatrice had constructed around it. Did this relationship compromise state security in any way? The king asked. Never, Rothschild replied with conviction. At no time did Princess Alexandra ever ask for classified information, nor did I ever provide her with anything that could be considered sensitive to national security. Our relationship was entirely separate from our professional duties. But you did have access to classified systems. Agent Morris interjected, clearly still trying to salvage some aspect of Beatrice's accusations. I had access to security protocols and personnel files, Rothschild acknowledged. But that access was monitored and recorded. Every time I logged into any system, every file I accessed, every action I took was documented in detail. Isabel felt another piece of the puzzle click into place as she understood how Beatrice had constructed her frame. The Queen Consort had used Rothschild's legitimate access to create the appearance of impropriety, knowing that his emotional involvement with Alexandra would make him seem guilty of far more than unprofessional conduct. Your Majesty, Isabel said, if we examine Captain Rothschild's access logs, I believe we'll find that the classified information that was allegedly compromised was never actually accessed by him at all. The financial transactions in question were timed to coincide with periods when he was logged into the system, but correlation is not causation. Beatrice had remained silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward with one final desperate attempt to salvage her position. Even if the financial evidence is questionable, she said, the fact remains that the captain and princess have engaged in conduct unbecoming of their positions. Such behavior undermines the dignity of the crown and calls Alexandra's judgment into question. It was a weaker accusation than treason, but it still carried significant weight in a monarchy where personal conduct was considered a reflection of fitness to rule. Beatrice was trying to pivot from criminal charges to moral ones, hoping to achieve, through scandal, what she had failed to accomplish through fabricated evidence. King Edward considered his wife's words carefully before responding, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of both personal disappointment and royal authority. The conduct of members of the royal family is indeed important, he said, which is why I am particularly disturbed by your willingness to fabricate evidence, coerce confessions, and attempt to destroy the reputation of my daughter and heir. The accusation was delivered with the calm certainty of a judge pronouncing sentence, and it marked the end of any pretense that Beatrice might survive this confrontation with her position intact. I have done nothing but serve this kingdom's best interests, Beatrice protested. Alexandra is weak and naive, and her poor judgment in her personal relationships proves that she is unfit to rule. The only poor judgment I see here, Prince William said, his voice heavy with disappointment, belongs to a woman who is willing to commit treason herself in order to falsely accuse others of the same crime. The condemnation from her own son was the final blow to Beatrice's defense. William had been her greatest ally and the intended beneficiary of her schemes, but his rejection of her methods left her completely isolated. William, she said, her voice breaking for the first time, everything I did was for you. You could have been a great king. I could never be a great anything built on the destruction of innocent people, he replied. What you did wasn't love or loyalty. It was ambition disguised as duty. King Edward moved to the windows that overlooked the palace gardens, his silhouette dark against the gray afternoon light. When he turned back to face the room, his expression had the terrible finality of a monarch making a decision that would reshape his kingdom. "Lady Thornfield," he said, "I want you to prepare a complete report of everything you have discovered about this conspiracy. I want every detail documented, every piece of evidence preserved, and every participant identified." "Yes, Your Majesty," Isabel replied, understanding that she was being tasked with creating the official record that would be used in the legal proceedings to come. "Captain Rothschild," the king continued, "you will submit your resignation from the Royal Guard effective immediately. Your conduct may not have risen to the level of treason, but it has been unprofessional and inappropriate for someone in your position." Rothschild nodded in acknowledgement, clearly having expected this outcome. His relationship with Alexandra had cost him his career, but under the circumstances, it was a relatively light punishment. "Agent Morrison," the king said, turning his attention to Beatrice's operative, "you will be turned over to the proper authorities for investigation of your role in this conspiracy. Your cooperation with the investigation may be taken into account when determining charges." Morrison's face went pale as he realized that his loyalty to Beatrice would likely result in criminal prosecution rather than professional advancement. Finally, King Edward turned to his wife, and the pain in his eyes was evident to everyone in the room. "Beatrice," he said softly, "you have betrayed not only me and my daughter, but the crown itself. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and your own admissions have confirmed your guilt." "Edward, please," she said, her composure finally cracking completely. "We can work through this. I made mistakes, but everything I did was motivated by love for this kingdom." "Love does not forge evidence," the king replied. "Love does not fabricate accusations of treason. Love does not attempt to destroy innocent people for personal gain." He paused, struggling with the weight of what he was about to say. "By the authority vested in me as King of Aldermere, I hereby strip you of the title Queen Consort and all privileges and honors associated with that position. You will be confined to palace quarters under guard pending formal charges for conspiracy, falsifying evidence, and attempting to subvert the lawful succession." The pronouncement hit Beatrice like a physical blow, and she staggered backward as the full weight of her fall from grace became clear. In a matter of hours, she had gone from queen consort to prisoner, her grand conspiracy having achieved nothing but her own destruction. Princess Alexandra had remained silent during her father's pronouncements, but now she stepped forward with the bearing of someone who had survived an attempt to destroy everything she held dear. "Father," she said, "I understand that my relationship with Captain Rothschild has created complications, but I want you to know that my feelings for him are genuine. If his resignation from the Royal Guard removes the professional obstacles to our relationship, then I would like your blessing to pursue it openly." The request was both brave and calculated. Alexandra was acknowledging the personal scandal that had been used against her, while simultaneously transforming it into something positive and honorable. Rather than hiding from the relationship that had been weaponized against her, she was claiming it as her own choice. King Edward studied his daughter's face, seeing in her expression the same strength and dignity that had made her beloved by the people of Aldermere. Her handling of the crisis had shown wisdom and composure under pressure, qualities that were essential for a future monarch. "You have my blessing," he said simply, "and I believe that your conduct during this ordeal has demonstrated exactly why you are fit to inherit the crown of Aldermere." Captain Rothschild stepped forward and bowed deeply to the king, his relief and gratitude evident in every line of his body. "Your Majesty, I swear that I will never again allow my personal feelings to compromise my professional judgment. Princess Alexandra deserves better than the scandal that has surrounded our relationship." "The scandal was not of your making," Alexandra said firmly. "It was manufactured by people who sought to use our genuine feelings as weapons against us." Prince William approached his half-sister and took her hands in his expression serious but warm. "Alexandra, I need you to know that I never wanted the throne this way," he said. If Mother had succeeded in her plans, I would have refused to accept a crown gained through such deception. I know, Alexander replied, squeezing his hands. Your integrity has never been in question. We are family, regardless of the ambitions that drove others to try to tear us apart. The reconciliation between the siblings was a powerful moment that highlighted just how much damage Beatrice's conspiracy could have caused if it had succeeded. Her plans had not only targeted Alexandra, but had threatened to destroy the relationship between all members of the royal family. Isabel watched as the various participants in the drama began to process the full implications of what had transpired. The immediate crisis was over, but the aftermath would reshape the monarchy for years to come. Beatrice's fall from power would require careful management to avoid destabilizing the kingdom, and the details of her conspiracy would need to be handled with discretion to protect the crown's reputation. Lady Thornfield, King Edward said, drawing her attention back to the present, your actions today have saved not only my daughter's reputation, but the integrity of the crown itself. I will not forget your courage and loyalty. I was simply doing my duty, Your Majesty, Isabel replied, though she knew that her decision to expose Beatrice's conspiracy had required far more courage than duty alone could provide. As the afternoon wore on, and the various participants began to leave Princess Alexandra's chambers, Isabel found herself alone with a young woman who had survived one of the most elaborate conspiracies in the kingdom's history. Alexandra stood by the windows, watching as Beatrice was escorted across the courtyard under guard, her fall from queen consort to prisoner complete. Do you think she really believed she was serving the kingdom's interests? Alexandra asked quietly. Isabel considered the question carefully before responding. I think she believed that power was more important than truth, she said. And once someone makes that calculation, they can justify almost anything as being for the greater good. Alexandra nodded, her expression thoughtful as she continued to watch the courtyard below. The crown comes with such responsibility, she said, not just to rule wisely, but to remember that the power we wield belongs to the people, not to us personally. It was the kind of wisdom that confirmed King Edward's faith in his daughter's fitness to rule. Alexandra had learned from this crisis not just about the dangers of political conspiracy, but about the true nature of leadership and the importance of integrity in positions of power. As the sun began to set over Ravencrest Palace, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, Isabel reflected on the day's events. A conspiracy that had taken months to construct had been dismantled in a matter of hours, brought down by the courage of those who chose truth over convenience, justice over personal gain. The kingdom of Aldermere would survive this crisis stronger than before, its future secured not through manipulation and deceit, but through the simple determination of good people to do what was right. And Princess Alexandra, tested by fire and emerging with her integrity intact, would one day make the kind of queen that her people deserved, one who understood that true strength came not from destroying others, but from standing firmly for principles that could not be compromised. The gates of the palace stood open as they always had, but now they guarded something more precious than royal privilege. They protected a crown that had been cleansed by truth and strengthened by justice. The screams that had echoed through these halls were silenced, but the lessons learned would resonate for generations to come.